Thank you very much. Welcome to this session on how to work with contractors. My name is Ross Jones. I'm a project manager at Local Energy Scotland, and I provide support to a range of different community and revenue generating projects. I also manage the procurement of services and technical advice on behalf of Local Energy Scotland. In the first part of this session today, I'm going to outline the support that's available to assist groups through our frameworks and planned supplier list, and also the provision of templates to support procurement. We will also be hearing from 3 speakers who will bring their own unique perspectives from both the community's experience of managing contractors and also 2 contractors in terms of supplying services to communities. Through this, we hope to better understand how we can be good clients and also successfully manage and support contractors to deliver successful projects for us. So whether your project is installing an air source heat pump into a community building, where a single contractor will manage the design and installation of an entire project, or a more complicated project on the scale that Carl will talk about for the Knoydart community, many of the lessons of how to successfully manage a contractor are the same at whatever scale of project. As part of CARE's funding, we require you as a group to demonstrate that the process you use to procure services is fair and demonstrates best value. As part of this, we require you to seek at least 3 quotations or propose a process that can be reviewed and approved by Local Energy Scotland. This is part of good procurement. What is important is that once appointed, the contractor is able to manage and be supported effectively to deliver that required service. We recognise it can be challenging to identify and appoint suppliers for professional services, especially in the early stages of development. Technical advice on the early stages of developing a project is now supported through CARES through our technical advice framework. This has been designed to accelerate the process of receiving detailed technical advice for communities who may have a great idea and where they are supported by CARES. Advice is procured by Local Energy Scotland through our framework of 5 multidisciplinary advisors. As a framework managed by us, Local Energy Scotland, we ensure that the support is procured efficiently and effectively and represents value for money. As part of this, we work with funded groups to confirm that the specification and also manage the delivery with a clear time frame. This is intended to de-risk this stage of the project for the group and also reduce some of the delays that groups can face in procuring services directly. Where groups also receive grant support for project management, then they will be eligible to use our project management support framework. The framework provides access to 8 contractors who have already completed a competitive selection process that has evaluated their relevant skills, experience, and secured competitive rates for use. CARES funded groups are required to approach a minimum of 3 of these suppliers and will be responsible for contracting directly with one of those suppliers. The framework can also be used by groups where support isn't directly funded by CARES, for example, where support might be required after financial close in a larger project. So finding a right supplier, this has always been challenging for communities, and it's especially so for those who are in remote locations, and also even more so in the current volatile energy and construction market. The Energy Saving Trust Renewable Installer Finder provides accredited micro-generation certification scheme installers that can be used. However, we know that this tool is limited to domestic installers. The CARES Capital Works supplier list will invite suppliers who are active in working with communities and CARES funded projects to list their interest. This will assist you to identify suppliers who are active and interested in undertaking community-based and CARES funded projects, and this will be available in the next couple of months. There are various CARES resources available already on the website. For those of you who are involved or thinking about installing something into a community building, the guidance on requesting quotations from installers is available through the website and feeds you through very simply in terms of the things that you would need to consider for that situation. There is also a guide to procurement, which is far wider in terms of looking at the more detail for a larger project. And there are also a series of invitation to tender templates, which are in the process of being updated. And most importantly, in terms of all your time with working with CARES, and that is work with your CARES Development Officer and work with them to help them understand and request assistance in terms of any of the issues that you may have around working through procuring the right services. I'm now going to hand over to Carl Smith from Energy Mutual. Carl's been working as a project manager on behalf of the Knoydart community for quite some time now, and I'm really pleased to have him to come along and share some of that perspective. Thank you.
Good. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting us along to this session. As Ross said, our energy security project in Knoydart is quite a large infrastructure project that has taken place over several years and involved several contractors feeding into different work packages. But I think the lessons that we've learned over the past couple of years can certainly be applied to other smaller standalone projects. So I think over the next 10 minutes, what I'll try to do is give you an overview of what the scope of the energy security project looks like. So we're still in the process of completing it, and some of the lessons learned in working with contractors over the past 2 years. And as Ross said, I'm acting as a project manager on behalf of the community group, which is Knoydart Renewables. And Knoydart Renewables are a community-owned utility. And we also have Frank Hatherley on the call here, who's the chair of Knoydart Renewables, and I'll invite him in at the end to give a view from the board. So I'll just give an overview of what we'll discuss here. We'll go into the details of a little bit of lessons learned from the tendering side of things and communicating with contractors, managing changes and disruptions to the schedule when they occur, and then also working with the community and managing perceptions and views from the community. So before we get into the lessons learned from this project, I just wanted to give you an overview of what this project actually involves. And for those of you who don't know Knoydart, Knoydart's based up in the northwest of Scotland. So you drive to Mallig, and then you take about a 30-minute boat over to Inveree. And the Knoydart Foundation owns the land on the Knoydart Peninsula, and when they acquired the land in 2001, they also acquired a fairly dilapidated hydropower system that was installed in the 1970s. And Knoydart Renewables was established as a community-owned utility, and it's Knoydart Renewables' responsibility to manage and maintain all of the electrical infrastructure, and that includes the hydro dam, the hydro system, the 11 kV overhead line, transformers, metering and billing for all the properties in the Inveree Bay area. And over the years, there's been a variety of improvement projects since the 1970s. And the first improvement project took place in 2001. And you can see the state of the hydro dam as a community took ownership of it. And as you can see, the dam's not doing a particularly good job in holding back water. There's a large project that took place in 2001 to improve the dam, as well as the pipeline. But actually, at the time, poor contractor selection and quality control and management of the contractor resulted in an unfavorable result, and several issues arose over the years. And we'll talk about those a little bit in the next couple of slides. On the right-hand side, we've got the dam as it is today, which is as it's been completed from most recent improvement projects. So we've got 2 big new pipes that go through the dam with control valves on it, and a much more secure and stable dam for the next 50+ years and more. One of the main improvement projects that took place 6 years ago, 7 years ago now, was an improvement to the wetted side of the dam, and we found that there were several leaks that occurred after the 2001 works. So this is looking at the dam from the loch side, and this allowed us to improve the dam structure and put two new large pipes through the dam, which provided additional power capacity for the hydro turbine. And we thought at this stage this was the hydro scheme, secure, working well, and we could start to build out the rest of the electrical infrastructure. But unfortunately, a couple of years later, the pipeline further down the hill broke open, and there was a large water feature halfway down the hillside. and the local hydro maintenance team had to quickly realign the pipelines and cast some new concrete anchor blocks to get the hydro scheme back up and running again. And because the community isn't connected to the main national grid, the sole source of electricity is this hydropower system. So whenever there's a problem with it, the community goes dark, lights go out, and a backup diesel generator has to kick in to take up or supply electricity to the community. So it's really a critical infrastructure project for the community. And a lot of businesses and obviously domestic customers rely on this reliable, clean energy source. And it was at this stage that the board, Knoydart Renewables board, realized that a larger infrastructure project is required to secure this pipeline, and also identify a permanent access track from the powerhouse up to the dam. Because until now, all the repair work up at the dam was done by helicopter. There's no access track going up to that dam. And they realized that if we want to grow the community and create a secure energy system, then this dam and this pipeline and the hydro turbine needs to be reliable. So that was the start of the energy security project. And here we've got a map of the Knoydart Renewables electrical grid. In the bottom right, you've got the hydropower system where the pipeline comes down the hill line to a powerhouse. And then the red dashed line represents the overhead 11 kV line. And all these numbers represent distribution transformers which supply low voltage electricity to connected customers. And the energy security project had 3 work packages. The main work package was a new pipeline and identifying a new track going up the hillside. And then there was a modernization package inside the powerhouse itself. So this was a new control system and governor for the hydro turbine. And then the third work package was improvements to the electrical distribution system in the village and some undergrounding work. So to start the project, we had to identify and map out the project team. And ultimately, the Knoydart Renewables board of directors are responsible for the project and are the project sponsors. But we decided we needed a dedicated project team. So within that project team, we had one representative, which was the chair of Knoydart Renewables, Frank Hatherley, and then myself as project manager, representing the interests of the board and communicating with the contractors. And then we also had we have some long-standing consultants that have been supporting us in developing the work packages. And we broke down the overall project into 3 work packages, which, as I said, were the pipeline, the powerhouse upgrades, and the distribution system refurbishments. And each one of these work packages, we had to go out to tender and appoint a contractor and manage the contractor to deliver the scope of each work package. But alongside actually delivering the project, we recognized it was important to map out the stakeholders who we want to bring along with us in this project. And that includes the wider community, the funders, adjoining landowners. And we had to identify what's the best way to communicate the project progress with these stakeholders. So the first lesson learned in tendering, we realized that in order to get a contractor interested in any of these work packages, we have to make sure that we sell the project to them. And I think that's the lesson learned from us, is that the more concise and precise that you can be with your tendering documentation, the easier it is for a contractor to respond. And if you think about it, the good contractors are generally going to be quite busy. So you want to make it easy for them to respond to your tendering process. And depending on the size of your project, you might have to go out to public procurement on Public Contracts Scotland. And I think our lesson learned in that process is that when you put it out to public procurement, you really don't know who's going to respond to it. And so you have to have quite a tight evaluation process when you start evaluating the tenders, and make sure that you're not evaluating just purely on price, but really looking at the quality of the contractor and the work that they've delivered in the past. And I think before appointing a contractor, you're making sure that they schedule on a site visit and you meet them face to face, and they really understand what the project entails as part of the tendering process. So I think lessons learned here is make it as easy as possible and sell the project to the contractor. And then I think the most important thing in any kind of project delivery is really communication. And once you've identified the best contractor for the job, identifying a formal line of communication between you as the client and the contractor. And when you're working with a community organization, there's generally several volunteer directors. And if you can appoint one director or your project manager to liaise and communicate with the contractor, I think that's generally been the easiest way to establish that line of communication. And in the bottom right-hand corner here, we've got different communication options. And I'm sure we've all experienced the kind of all-channel communication in the bottom right here, where an email goes out to a group of people and everyone jumps in with their own views and comments. And I think the challenge in that is that the contractor can get a bit lost and confused in who's actually issuing an instruction. So in some ways, a wheel structure where you've got one person representing the interests of the client, the board, that can go back to the client or the board of directors, canvass their thoughts and decisions, agree a response, and then send the response back to the contractor, is sometimes the easiest way to deal with or establish a formal line of communication. And then the other aspect is establishing expectations with the contractor from day one and putting in place expectations around progress reports and communication from the contractor. And then the other two aspects around managing input from community directors. So if you've got one director who's responsible for the project, support that director and allow them to communicate with the contractors so that the communication chain can remain relatively clean. So that's communication. Lessons learned on variations and changes. I think this is something that for any project, there's always going to be an element of risk and uncertainty, and changes will emerge. And how you address those changes and variations is quite important. So, one aspect is making sure that you've also got some contingency in the budget so that you can respond to those variations. And I think oftentimes friction can arise with a contractor during variations because they're flagging up something that wasn't in the original contract or they didn't account for in their pricing. And now there's an opportunity for them to raise their pricing to address this variation. And so having that communication with the contractor and trust with the contractor that they're not going to take advantage of the situation is quite important. But when a variation does occur and the contractor raises it, it's important for the client to respond to it very quickly. So establishing what that variation process looks like with your team, with your board, in advance of it occurring, it can really speed up that decision-making process. So it might be that you say to your nominated director or your project manager, we're happy for you to make decisions with contractors up to a certain threshold, a cash threshold or a value threshold. Anything above that, then we need you to provide a report to the board in order to make a decision on it. And we've experimented with an SBAR approach with some of the variations. So this is just a one-page document that we can send out to community directors, and it gets them up to speed as quickly as possible with the situation and the decision that we're trying to make. So the SBAR has been used in healthcare setting for a number of years and also in the military setting, but it's starting to kind of filter its way into project management processes. And it's quite a nice, effective way to communicate complex decision-making processes. So that's, make it easy, decide how you're going to manage variations in advance of them occurring. And then I think, finally, from my side is managing community perceptions. And in our project, it's been a 2-year project, and we've had contractors living in the community, being involved in the community, and inevitably, things will go wrong. No one's perfect. Mistakes will be made. But I think it's important to put those mistakes in perspective. And oftentimes, the community view is just the tip of the project iceberg, and they don't really, the rest of the community doesn't see all the work that goes on in actually managing the project and making the project come to fruition, and all the challenges and hurdles that the contractor and the project team have had to overcome. So I think it's important whenever there's a little element of negative feedback, take it on board, but also manage that community perception and change it around to focusing on the positives and all the hurdles that have been overcome during the course of the project. And certainly celebrate milestones. And when the contractor has done an exceptional job, really go out of the way to praise the contractor for the work that they've done. So I think that's all that I want to share in terms of our lessons learned. I've got a final slide here for Frank to jump in here. He's the chair of Knoydart Renewables, and Frank and I have worked very closely the past couple of years to communicate with the board, the community, and the contractors. So I'll let Frank step in, and hopefully he can unmute himself. Yeah. Are you there, Frank?
Myself. As a funded group, Knoydart Renewables, I think it's actually essential before you appoint a project manager to actually create a timeline and work out what things might be done to facilitate the project manager before they're actually appointed. We did start negotiations with the estates. It's most of our kit isn't actually on foundation land, it's on a private estate owner's land. That needed to be done in a sense separately in terms of clearing the ground. Ditto the planning process. Again, this is something that we did embark on in advance. Possibly we should have embarked upon it further in advance. So maybe we needed to give cognizance to those things that needed to be done before we moved to the position of appointing Kyle a project manager. To which I add, choose the right project manager, have face-to-face contact, and make sure they really do understand the context of the community, the logistics that are associated with it. When I say really understand, I mean really understand. Clearly Kyle did and does, but it would have been very easy to have had things unravel if we'd appointed the wrong project manager. So I think one has to think, very much think about that. As Kyle has intimated, and as I think the screen says, there needs to be a named and empowered member of the board. In this case, it's myself as chair that can make decisions, because contractors and Kyle have required fairly instant decisions. The capacity to convene a board meeting, discuss it, thrash it around, that could take a month or more, but actually it might mean that a contractor wants to know whether to do something or not, a variation, and that decision is needed pretty well immediately. So the board member needs to understand the whole project and be suitably empowered. And I was empowered by minute and vote at a board meeting, legal document that allowed Kyle and myself to make decisions on behalf of the board. I think that's proved vital at various points. Someone on the board needs to represent the project to the community and act as, if not a filter, at least act as a protection for the project manager. And to a certain extent, that's been my role in the project, to make sure that everything on Knoydart doesn't intrude on Kyle, to stop him doing his job and to stop the contractor doing their job. So you can't just fire and forget appointing a project manager. It requires, other involvement is required, and it's a kind of four-way thing: project manager, the client, Local Energy Scotland, and the contractor. All of these need to work successfully together. That's all, folks.
I think it's all, folks. Yeah. No, thanks very much for listening. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Carl. I'm now going to hand over to Jamie and allow Jamie to talk to you about his experience as a contractor supplying both communities and private clients. Thank you.
Hello everyone, thanks Ross. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Just going to try share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that okay.
Yep, that's good, thank you. Is
that okay? Great, right, thanks very much Ross, thanks everyone for having me here today. My name is Jamie Storry. I am the National Sales Manager for Emtec Energy. We are a solar PV contractor based near Glasgow. Sorry, I'm just trying to get these in order. We specialise in solar PV projects of a commercial industrial scale, so really anything between 100 kilowatts through to 5 megawatts is the type of project that we would work on. We are an EPC contractor. We provide a full turnkey solution, and we've been involved in a number of community projects over the years, as well as private end user client projects. So I think the key areas that I thought of when I was noting this down, I think some of them have already been covered. The key areas where the community groups can make their projects more attractive to the contractor market. It's right every step of the way, but I think in the initial stages, it's about how you specify that project, how you select who you're going to ask to tender, and how you run through that procurement process. By having the right specification, it really gives you more options in terms of the type of contractor that you can go out to. If you don't have a design, or you only have a very rough design, and you need to go out to ask a contractor to design that for you before they can even quote, which is something that we have seen quite often with community groups in the past. For one thing, it really slows down the process because it means the contractor has a lot more work to do before they can provide you with a quote. And it potentially also puts contractors off because they're having to put all that work and effort in to something that they might never actually win. So it's time wasted as far as they're concerned. So obviously with the resources that are available to community groups now through CARES and through Local Energy Scotland, I suppose there really shouldn't be an excuse for coming out to tender with a project that you don't have a very well thought out, well planned design and specification for, which again, makes our job a lot easier when pulling a price together. And the next thing for me, it's about selecting these contractors. How do you go about picking who you want to tender for your project? I think this is where you need to be very careful. I think you need to be careful in that you are only choosing contractors from ideally a pre-approved list from CARES, but also that they meet the right qualifications, they have the right qualifications and standards, but also they're the right size, they're delivering the right type of project. We quite often get asked to look at projects that are 20 kilowatts of solar PV on a community building roof, which, great projects need to be done, quite right that the community's doing them, but they're not projects that we can support with. And again, you might go to a local electrical contractor and ask him to install 500 kilowatts of solar for you, and it's just not going to end well. So it is about understanding the scope of your project and making sure it fits with the contractors that you're going out to. I think that's very important. Your procurement process, you need to think about it. Obviously, it needs to meet the requirements of your funders. It needs to get you to the point of having a contractor in place. But again, it needs to be attractive to the contractor. The contractor has to look at that process, make sure they're happy with following it all the way through, and hopefully getting the end result. Again, we've I think Kyle mentioned it there about getting site visits as quickly as possible and making sure that they understand the site and things like that, which I do agree with, but I think there needs to be a staged selection process, because if you're one of 4 or 5 contractors being asked to price a job and each contractor is getting asked to attend site, you've got to think about the costs involved about that. You've got to think about the time involved in that for the contractor, depending on how remote or inaccessible your site is. It might make it less attractive. Personally, if I knew I was one of 6 pricing a job, I wouldn't be that keen on attending a formal site visit in the first instance. Ideally, there would be some form of pre-selection criteria, such as a desktop assessment based on a set specification, a desktop proposal or a budget price. Take that down to the final 2 and have them attend site. And then, in my opinion, as a contractor, I would see that as being much more beneficial to attend that site rather than if I was one of 4 or 5 or 6. So try and see what you can do with your procurement process to make it more attractive. Final quotes and fixed pricing. Again, this is something, well, right now in the current market, doesn't matter what type of client it is, this is extremely challenging right now, and historically it has always been a challenge with CARES projects. Again, this is when, thinking of projects in the past, we would be approached by a community group that had an idea of what they might like to do. We designed a system, came up with a solution, they secured their funding for it and gave us the go-ahead. But once they give us the go-ahead, they're not in a position to place an order because we still had to go and secure the grid connection. We still had to secure planning permission. We still had to carry out several pieces of pre-construction work, which are entirely dependent on a third party. And it doesn't make sense for anyone involved to fix and enter into a contract at that stage because there are still several points of failure along the way. What we noticed doing this with community groups was that was a challenge, that was an issue, but the reality is that price could change during that process, and it could potentially change quite significantly because you might find that you need another £10,000 for your grid connection, or you might find that the planning department want you to screen an array, or they want you to carry out a particular survey. So you have to have that again, as I think Kyle touched on, about having budgets, about having contingencies built in to your funding approval to allow that to happen throughout that process. Whether you can, I think, as a contractor, again, we would be quite happy to start that in-depth pre-construction work if we were covered under a letter of intent or a heads of terms agreement. So speak to CARES or Local Energy Scotland and see if they're happy for you to allocate a portion of funding towards cover for a letter of intent, which will get that work done for you by the contractor. And when it comes to that final quotation, when it comes to you're ready to place an order, everything's in place, you have to be able to move very quickly and sign that contract with the contractor. Currently, right now, we can only hold a quote for 7 days, and that's because our suppliers will only hold a quote for 7 days. So when we actually get an order in right now, it's a massive flurry of activity for our procurement team to go and secure materials at the price we quoted, because prices are changing constantly. The market has calmed down quite a bit over the last month or so, but there is a real inflexibility there from the supply chain. Unfortunately, that gets passed all the way up the chain to the client, but you need to be in a position to make that contract award as quickly as possible once the final price has been established. Yeah, procurement and logistics and site establishment. I think these are things where I think community groups can sell themselves a lot better, and historically, I think that in my own experience, they've missed a trick. I think these are the areas where the uniqueness of community groups can actually help. If there are local contractors, if we need to access a roof, for example, to carry out a survey, or from an installation point of view, if there's a local access company, scaffolder provider, equipment provider that we might not know about, make sure you introduce them to your contractor. Make sure they know about it. If storage is required, is there a local farmer who would rent a shed? Is there, these are areas where, well, for one thing, you could potentially save money, but it also makes the job run a bit smoother if you can bring that community element into it there. Again, with the site establishment, there's always costs associated with things like welfare, things like waste management, waste disposal, storage, accommodation even, community groups that we've worked with in the past have managed to get us deals with local bed and breakfasts and things like that to make sure that the guys on site are well looked after, but also that the subsistence cost within the project is as low as possible. So yeah, quite a few areas there where that I think are important to have a good think about. Just going to run through another couple of slides quickly because I've lost track of time slightly. But one thing that I, again, come across quite regularly, and this is not just with community groups, this could be with distilleries, manufacturers, farmers, any number of private clients. Before they actually engage with us, I always question how much they've actually thought about the project, because there is a lot, particularly, and I'm relating this all to a solar PV project, but I'm sure it would transfer to others. There are a lot of things that you need to consider, and there are quite a few areas here that can kill a project stone dead before you even get to speaking to a contractor. And if you need to fail, you're better failing fast than failing quick. Understanding where those connection points are, where you can get power into a network or out to the grid, understanding what the grid condition is, send that budget G99 request to the DNO, check the heat maps, phone up the local design engineer, figure out who looks after your substation or your grid supply point, get some engagement with them as early as possible. Roofs structurally, if you're looking at a roof mount array, particularly in an older community building, get it checked, because there is a very good chance there's something needing repaired on that roof before someone goes up there to try and fit panels to it. Understanding the technicality of the system, the technology that's involved, the equipment that you need, what warranties you're looking for, what level of security you're looking for from the contractor, the type of inverter you'd like to use. That's a huge impact. That can have a huge impact on cost. The type of panels that you use. There's lots to consider. So have a checklist, work your way through it, and it'll, again, once a contractor realizes that you have really understood what you are asking them for, it will help them engage with you a lot more fully. Again, this kind of goes back to something I covered earlier in terms of your procurement process and your contractual process, but I thought it would be useful to put this up here. I mean, this is effectively our process that we follow, that we work to when we're engaging with a private end user client. And as you can probably see, that will differ quite significantly from how a more formal procurement process covered with, administered by somebody like CARES or Local Energy Scotland. So you've got to understand, ask the contractor, what would your normal process be? See where the points are that they can match up and find out the areas that they're willing to negotiate on. Again, back to the contractor selection piece and making sure you're picking the right people. What qualifications do you need? What qualifications does the contractor need to have in order to meet the requirements of your project? Again, if you are going out to a small local contractor, are they going to have if you're up to a certain level of funding that needs to be covered by a particular accreditation, are they going to have it? Is that going to be a selection criteria for you? So understand that earlier on and set it out as a criteria. That's me done with my slides. Yeah, so that's me. I've managed to get through them fairly quickly, hopefully.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And now I'm going to introduce John Masland from Locogen, who is a supplier on our technical advice framework. And John is going to talk about his experience in terms of supporting communities and other organisations around procurement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross.
If you could turn on your
I am trying to turn my camera on, but it's refusing to do anything, unfortunately. So I'll keep trying, but yeah, I'm getting no success with my camera, I'm afraid. One last try. No, I'm just going to crack on, I'm afraid, if I can.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, there we go. Oh, marvelous. Right, so my name is John Masland. I work as the community-focused program manager at Locogen. So hopefully most of you will know Locogen, given our track record in this space. We all prepared our slides independently, I'm afraid, for the audience here. So I will shamelessly repeat many of the excellent points that have been made by Kyle and Jamie over the last 20 minutes, because Many of them are things that I have in my slide deck as well, I'm afraid. But I don't think there's any harm in repeating them as good practice. So yeah, we go for next slide, please. So the title was contractors, but I just wanted to make sure everyone was sort of comfortable that all the points that I make cover, and those that my colleagues have made as well, cover, professional advisors, consultants, technicians, designers, installers, engineers, project managers, operational managers, all of these sort of potential third parties that you might use to contract with. Sometimes contractors is used in a more specific sense to mean people who come along and actually in effect run a sort of installation or as Jamie has said, an EPC type contract, but we're using it in the loosest sense. And also many of the points that I make here are I suggest they're handpicked from a guide for good project management. They're not anything that we've come up with. You'll recognize many of them from reading The Idiot's Guide to Project Management, and again, no harm in repeating them. But top of the tree, as all my colleagues have talked about, is of course defining your requirement specification and trying to make that as clear as you can, and we all acknowledge that that's really challenging, particularly for people who perhaps are trying to pull that sort of description together, who don't necessarily have a background in renewable energy, don't necessarily have a background in sort of related construction areas or engineering. And many of our community groups that we work with don't have that sort of background and therefore don't have those sort of skills. So again, just to reiterate Ross's point of how critical it is and how valuable it is to have the resources that Local Energy Scotland offer community groups and at this stage to try and make your specifications as clear as possible, but also to try and make them appealing and make them replicable, because it's not just a case of trying to understand the requirements from your perspective, but also there is a certain sense that you may have to sell your project to contractors. This is a very busy market. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but trying to make your projects clear and appealing is really key to getting good contractors who, as I think Carl said, who are busy, and that means they're probably good, but trying to get them on board. You also want to identify your requirements in relation to key project stages, and so whether you're doing there are classic stages in project development in renewables, usually starting with some sort of option appraisal, then moving to feasibility, business case, sorting out all your consents, doing a design, potentially doing a detailed design, then doing a build, and then operating, who's going to operate and maintain the system at the end of the day. So all of these are classic sort of development, sort of construction, engineering project stages. It's really unwise to try and skip those stages, one of those stages, if you want to try and cut costs, because you are increasing the risk of your project going down a blind alley. So don't skip stages. Understand where your project is in relation to those stages and stick to the stages because they're there for very good reasons. Try not to over-specify your project. By that, I mean try to make sure that it's reasonable in terms of what you're asking for is relatively close to the budget that you have available, and that you're not trying to way over specify your requirements in relation to the budget spend that you have. Where possible, as Jamie has talked about, use existing contract templates. It sounds like CARES can help with doing that, but there are all sorts of standard templates out there in the market for doing things like design and build stages, using EPC contracts, using classic design and build contracts, going down the NEC route for the family of contractual templates, all of which could be an alternative to using legal advisors to draw up bespoke contracts for you. But they're all out there, they're all being used in the market, and can all really reduce your time and risk in trying to put those sorts of contracts together. Okay, if you're developing a more complex project, then as Knoydart have talked about, try and use a third-party expert. In their case, they've used Kyle as a project manager, but in other cases, frequently, even in the industry, the client will appoint a client project manager or a client engineer in order to help them through the process. And because they don't expect to have all the answers, they want to have an expert on their side who then helps them to take the whole process through these stages, and it acts as their sort of eyes and ears and their expert on their side. So if you shouldn't necessarily expect to do this all yourself in-house, look at trying to appoint these expert advisors. I'm not going to go into detail on picking your contractor carefully because everyone has talked about that. But basically, can you see yourself effectively working effectively with them? Do they have all the essential skills? Do they have the necessary experience? And Jamie said accreditations. Do you want to work with a large company or an SME? They're very likely to have very different approaches to the way they go about doing things. And of course, do they have experience of working with other community groups? That's, I would say, really critical. Agree when you've appointed your contractor, you've gone through the process. Agree with them what project success looks like. Go through the process of looking at your risk log. Have we jointly identified all the risks? Are there any risks we've left out? How can we mitigate these risks? Really important discussion to have right as soon as you have a sort of project kickoff meeting. That's something to include on your agenda. And of course, make sure that you've got clear project milestones and agree payment points, because certainly if you're dealing with SMEs, making sure that they have a positive cash flow is really important. I say that from our perspective, from us, but it would be really important for any SME that you're dealing with to make sure that those payment points are clear. And as I think Carl said, he talked about a clean communication chain. So defining who it is, when it is, and how you communicate. Again, something for that project kickoff meeting, and making sure you've scheduled in regular project update sessions throughout the term of the project, so that you're communicating. You've booked the time in advance and you've set those in motion. Just obvious project management good practice. Okay, next slide, please. Again, as people have talked about, empowering your team from your client side is really useful. Kyle's description was little diagrams are really nice. So I can't really improve on those, but I would just say empower your client team on your side. Make sure they can make decisions. As he said, very often lengthy sort of delays before decisions can be made are real killers for projects, for contractors, and very frustrating. So we need ideally an empowered project team that can make these decisions, and ideally a single person that is our point of contact. Of course, be open with your contractor. If you suddenly are aware that one of your key people in your small project team is suddenly being hit by an unexpected sort of emergency that they have to go off and deal with, then just make sure you're completely open with the team. We will understand in most cases. We will try and find ways around that problem, or potentially put the project on delay. But you know, it's that openness is really important. We need to know about when people are on holidays in advance, so that suddenly the project doesn't get held up because someone's gone away for 2 weeks. Making sure that sort of lead register is something that you approach right from the beginning. And again, everyone's talked about change control, but it really is a critical thing in the whole process here, making sure that if on fixed price contracts you're dealing with change control effectively. It's so critical from our point of view, especially when we're dealing with potentially lots of voices who all like their own ideas, and we're trying to make sure that we don't have project requirement creep. So again, people have talked about having a contingency budget. It's super important that you have something that you can fall back on if you need to make changes. And contractors are flexible to a degree, but ultimately, if those changes are significant, they will need additional budget to address. And if you haven't got a contingency in your budget, then the project is in a very difficult spot. So try and make sure that there is some way of managing that change control process up front, and that the pricing can be adjusted. Talked about contingency. We talked about making financial payments on time. Sort of, yeah, I guess my final point really is make sure that you're aware of the status of the market. It is, as others have said, very volatile at present. We are really busy, like most other contractors. Everyone needs to know and accept that that those involved on the contractor side are going to have some real challenges with doing things immediately right now. They've got some long lead-in periods for addressing contracts, and it's incredibly difficult from a supply chain, as Jamie has talked about with his 7-day sort of commitments on prices. We're the same, and fixing contracts for longer periods of time is just incredibly difficult. So again, need to accept that, and this is not easy when you've got a fixed sort of funding budget from a third party, is what happens if prices change, exchange rates change. You're ordering a turbine from Europe, and suddenly the pound drops, and it's costing more, and that's a really difficult challenge to face. But it's one that it's better to be knowledgeable up front rather than have to address in the middle of a project. Okay, final slide. I'm not going to go through these. These are just some summary points. Use as much in-house expertise as you can possibly get. Use CARES. Be commercially aware. Adopt good practice for project management. One contractor typically can't do everything, but it's useful to have a lead contractor that can then potentially contract others underneath it, and then there's a clear sort of point of responsibility. Be aware of the commercial risks that your contractor faces around fixed prices and change control. And as I've said, celebrate successes, because that iceberg is pretty big. And the only people that know about that iceberg are going to be your project team and your contractor. And when you reach the end, understanding how big that iceberg was and what a big challenge it was, and how sort of pleased you are and impressed with the services that you get. It's well worth celebrating with your everyone involved. So definitely encourage you. And of course, final one, always find biscuits is really critical. So make sure if you do have physical meetings, yeah, biscuits is great. Can't stress the value of biscuits. Okay, that's me. Thank you very much. That's the last one.
Thank you very much, John, for your time there, and also to Kyle and Jamie and also Frank. We have run full time on this session. I'm just going to stop the recording now.